And this is the same relationship between the speaker and the immanence to which he is calling. The speaker is made for it, not just to search among the broad plains alone. Welcome to Ostracon, a podcast that translates fragments into the whole from which they came. Today we're reading You Are the Future, the Great Sunrise Red by Rainer Maria Rilke. We said a little bit more about Rilke and his life when we read another piece of his, If I Had Grown Up in a Land Where Days. So today we'll move straight to reading and discussing this new piece. Again, this is a translation by Babette Deutsch, and the poem is from Rilke's Book of Hours. You are the future, the great sunrise red above the broad plains of eternity. You are the cock crow when time's night has fled. You are the dew, the matins, and the maid, the stranger and the mother. You are death. You are the changeful shape that out of fate rears up in everlasting solitude, the unlamented and the unacclaimed, beyond describing, as some savage would. You are the deep epitome of things, that keeps its being's secret with locked lip, and shows itself to others otherwise, to the ship a haven, to the land a ship. That last line is one of my favorites in all poetry. You show yourself to others otherwise, to the ship a haven, to the land a ship. And we'll come back to that at the end today. But it is just one of many paradoxes that run through this poem. A poem about relationship, but a relationship that is itself paradoxical and surpassing of expectation. So let's go stanza by stanza. The first one, you are the future, the great sunrise red above the broad plains of eternity. So we see the poet is in relationship with immanence, something that is coming for sure, something writ as large as time and the movement of the cosmos. And there is, on the one hand, a sense of creation, of hope, of future, the word that he uses, that this immanence brings with it experience to be had. The cock crow when time's night has fled. Not just the night, but time's night. In other words, all the things that are obscured because of time, because our contingency in time and place, that we can only be here, now, and the obscuring effect that that has on our knowledge and experience. So time's night has fled. The contingency of time is fled. The cock crow as in the morning. You are the dew, the matins, the morning birds, the beauty of a landscape that you can imagine glistening with dew like gems at sunrise if you've ever seen it. Note that the narrator is on the broad plains of eternity, as he says, when he sees this impending illumination. And what is he doing on these broad plains of eternity? As I read it, it feels to me that he's sort of stranded there, picking about. The plains are broad, they're eternal, they go all ways in every direction forever. which has a sense of isolation. To me personally, when I read this poem, the narrator situated on the broad plains of eternity makes me think of how impossible it is to wrap the mind around the idea of eternity, the idea of life that goes on and on. So much of who we are, how we live, how we identify time and relationship is contingent on them ending. What will I achieve in this day, in this hour, at this time together with this person? And I know it's ending. And that ending is a sense of imminence. It's a different sense of imminence, though, than is in this poem. The sunrise here is illuminating not an end, but it's illuminating the truth of eternity after, as we said, time's night, or the contingency of time, has fled. But before the imminence of this sunrise, I can imagine this speaker faced with the idea of going on and on and on, and being confused and mystified by its seeming impossibility, and maybe even its seeming isolation, the giganticness of space and time. And the speaker does here seem to be alone. He's not with anyone, but he's speaking directly to this immanence. Here he is by himself on these eternal plains. And so you can imagine the speaker's joy when, at last, the future, the great sunrise, the dew, the birds, it arrives, and illumination is brought to what otherwise seemed only vast space. But then in this same stanza, we come to the other characteristics of this immanence. Everything that we've talked about so far has been nature imagery, sort of raw beauty and spatial beauty. But at the end here, it becomes personal. You are the stranger and the mother. So this immanence, this illumination, is something that is so close to him that it is like a mother, something that has given birth to him, a body in which he dwelt once and came from, something that has nurtured him in his vulnerability, incredible intimacy, but yet the stranger. So something that could be so close and yet still unknown, as overwhelming as the concept of eternity might be. Even this imminent illumination is also beyond our current knowing. And then at last it says, you are death, the great unknowing, the thing that we all must do and cannot see the other side of but for trust. And this imminence of death relates to this other characterization of stranger and mother. We mentioned a moment ago how so much of how we define ourselves, our relationships, what we do, what we think in this contingent time and place in the world is conditioned by the concept that we know it will end. It causes us to make certain choices, to feel urgency, to make decisions, maybe to live a certain way. And so death is that ultimate ending. It is part of the conditions that cause us to become who we are. It's a participating factor in how we are made. And so it is like mother in the sense that it has a hand creatively in our identity. But then it is also stranger because we cannot see the other side of it. We live with it day by day, intimately, and yet we cannot know it yet. So we began with this hopeful image of sunrise, the end of the night, the birds singing. But we are led to discover that this sunrise, this beauty, is not only beauty in a temporal sense. We are on the broad plains of eternity, and we are going beyond contingency, and therefore this beauty has a deeper richness, a deeper, even mother-like intimacy, and a strangeness and even the unknowing of death, because the illumination will cause us to see things that could not be found alone without it on these broad plains. And maybe even it is this death that is the fleeing of time's night and the end of contingency. That is an even more awe-inspiring vision than we began with. We began with the new day where anything is possible. And we know that hope, to wake up in an exciting place and everything is before you. But you don't know what will happen. As we never know what will happen, this illumination is not a series of things that we merely desire and can control. This is an illumination beyond the constructs of what we are. It reminds me a little bit of C.S. Lewis's description in The Great Divorce about heaven like a dawn that continues to come and always gets brighter and always becomes more imminent and closer and more thrilling and exciting asymptotically forever. And that moves us into the second stanza. You are the changeful shape that out of fate rears up in everlasting solitude, the unlamented and the unacclaimed, beyond describing as some savage would. So another set of powerful images similar to the ones that we have discussed. The changeful shape, that's an interesting word. It's not a changing shape. It's not transient or untrustworthy. It's a changeful shape. In other words, it is full of the ability to change from night to day, to change from time to eternity. And out of fate, which I think is related to the death that we've read already, it rears up in everlasting solitude. It doesn't say that it is everlasting solitude, but that this fullness of change comes in the solitude, in the speaker's singleness out there in the broad plains of eternity when he is calling to the you in the poem, the imminent you for which he longs. It rears up there almost in the way when we go out into silence and reflection and free ourselves from distraction. There maybe we can find our hearts. He describes this immanence as unlamented and unacclaimed. Another paradox, like the mother and the stranger. Despite its illuminating power, its covering over of eternity, it is at the same time unlamented, as in lost without sadness, perhaps lost by others who don't feel any loss, and unacclaimed, as in unappreciated, beyond describing, as some savage wood, wood, a wild forest, something that hasn't been tamed, that cannot be tamed, something elemental, something that is so full of the life that we are made of that it won't be negotiated. We can enter it, but we have to enter out of a sense of courage and vulnerability, because it will not bend to us. Again, it emphasizes the bigness of this illumination that is beyond anything that we can own or control. Perhaps that's why it is unlamented and unacclaimed. Maybe out there, picking through the broad plains of eternity, the imminent illumination is simply too big to actually appreciate, either to appreciate what it would be to have it or what it would be to lose it. It relates, I think, to an image in the first stanza that we did not delve into yet, the cock crow. We talked about the birds singing at the sunrise, but the cock crow has a kind of double meaning, because it also appears in the gospel when Peter 3 times denies Christ. And this unlamenting and unacclaiming is itself a kind of denial of the nature of this immanence. It is the future, the mother, the stranger, intrinsic to us as death. And yet, amid distraction, it can be hard to believe it's even there. And now, you are the deep epitome of things, which says explicitly what we've been saying all along in the imagery above, that keeps its beings secret with locked lip. So to find it, to know it, we must go through this imminent illumination, maybe even through a death or a form of it. And finally, and shows itself to others otherwise, to the ship a haven, to the land a ship, which encapsulates all the wonder of the paradoxes that we have had thus far. Whoever you are, wherever you are, this illumination, this immanence of God reveals itself to you as the thing that complements you. To the night, day. To the plains, dew. To the mother, stranger. To life, death. The changeful shape. The wilderness to be entered, the end of solitude. It shows itself to others otherwise as their complement. To the ship, a haven. To the land, a ship. If you are rooted, then the chance to go out over the deep waters in an adventurous search. If you are without home, without rest, without a base, then the harbor, the place of return. We need them both to go out and to come back. And there's a constant fulfillment of each one by the existence of the other. We started out recognizing this poem was about relationship, and we've seen the speaker calling out to this dawn-like immanence throughout all 3 stanzas. And we see that relationship very tangibly in the ship and the harbor. They are made for each other. The harbor is there for the ship to return. The ship goes out in order to get somewhere. Without the harbor, then the ship on the flat seas might as well be the broad plains of eternity and of isolation and contingency, to be ultimately sunk in nothingness. But it's made for the harbor, and the harbor waits for it. Their purposes are interrelated. And this is the same relationship between the speaker and the immanence to which he is calling. The speaker is made for it, not just to search among the broad plains alone. And it is for the speaker, though it is stranger, though it is beyond the veil of a death, it is also mother. It is intrinsic to us who wait for it. To paraphrase Augustine, hunger does not exist unless it can be satisfied. And this fulfillment shows itself to others otherwise. It shows to each of us, proves itself always as the other half of the relationship, as the completing complement, the one that goes with us to make us what we are. To the ship, a haven; to the land, a ship. And in the most ultimate sense, to return to the speaker where we found him on the broad plains of eternity, looking up from our contingency, the end of time's night, and the imminence of illumination.